not, I mean, it's not a terrible suggestion.
Yeah, it's a good idea. They don't probably get a space.
What?
They don't probably, it's a big space, they might not get
Right.
it.
Yeah. Well, it'd be huge tax write-off.
Yeah.
Sure needs a tax write-off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I had my office in that road for
Is that right?
for a year. It was, what was the bank name? Great Western Bank had the building, right, and before they moved down to Rancho, it was the year of the big flood, 1898.
Uh-huh.
And I took the evacuation helicopter into town, where we were at the time, and I had like a power bill, so there's nobody had been in town forever. And Gary, what's his last name? Gary Dundell was the bank manager. And I said, I can't chat. I have to go. I have to find office space. We need to move out of this. And he said, you need office space? We're moving out tomorrow. And it would be so great if we had somebody watching the building. And we were in there for free for a whole year.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's a good rate.
With telephones and desks and the whole thing and file cabinets.
Oh, what a cool building. It's a good building. Let me look at my cell phone and see if,
It was a
maybe
beautiful
first, oh, there's
space.
Dawn. Hi, Dawn.
Hey, Dawn.
How are you?
Good, how about you?
Good.
Santa Barbara, I'm going to say that.
We all summer clothes.
Right.
Not my question, Jack.
Yeah. Did you guys see the, this, apparently not historic 1920s building that they ripped down? They already ripped it down in Pebble Beach.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know about that.
No.
That's a county approval, apparently.
But there
Which
were only
one was that?
that Pebble Beach story of very large 1920.
Oh, the Richard
no, no,
Noyes
no,
House.
no, no, no,
Not
no,
the
no,
Noyes
no,
House.
no. This historic, not this revivalist mission style mansion. Right. It seemed like a shame, though.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Melanie.
Hello. Hi.
How are you? How was your vacation?
It was good, except for COVID. I was explaining to people.
Madam Chair, you want to get us started? We're,
Yeah, here we go.
do our 90 minutes.
Is it on? Hello? Okay, it's
Am I allowed to pass out documents?
not a
Hold on,
huge
Neil.
group.
Hold on.
We're just calling the meeting to order at 2-ish. And now we have public comments on non-agenda items. The agenda is very simple. It's just this a buildable envelope presentation and discussion. But anything not on the agenda can be discussed now. Public comments, anyone? It looks like Doug also.
Is this, can I pass out a document on
Sure.
architecture to people?
You may.
You have something you want to say, or you're just handing out a document?
I'm just gonna hand it out. It's just a basic document. It's written by Nikos Salangaros, The Quest to Liberate Architecture from Modernism's Evils. It speaks to the fact that styles are not purely subjective, that there is an objective basis for evaluating architectural styles. Just a nice document. And I just had a question. I'm running out.
Thank you.
It's okay, actually, Ken White gave me one already.
Okay.
So for those on Zoom, Neil is just handing out a document to the steering committee that he wants them to take a look at their leisure.
Nori Winter, is he now gone? Is that?
No, he's here. He's the one doing the presentation today.
Oh, he's with us today?
Yep.
Excellent.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with public business that is not about the buildable envelope? I can now ask the committee for the same question as members of the public also. No? Nothing to say? Lots to say.
Question for Brad.
Go.
Any progress on the landscape ordinance?
Oh, do you want to save that for the agenda item for the update on consultant and staff work? Okay.
Okay.
I do it-
Which might be number 4. Yeah, we're on 3. We are
I think
basically
Melanie
on.
has an
Oh, you have an announcement.
No, just a question for Brandon. Brandon, under the last agenda item, may we speak to and ask you about the forest management plan?
Sure, yeah, we can talk about that right now too if you want. I think they kind of dovetails with what.
Is, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that'd be great. No, I just have a question. Where are we on that, and are we gonna have any input since we're, crafting some ideas for that? And it's, we have to interrelate the landscaping as well as the, I think, the forest management plan. So, and maybe, can you help us with that? Are you involved in it in any way?
Thank you. So I think we're on agenda item number 4 now, receiving an update on consultant and staff work products. I did get a question from Doug. I don't think you were mic'd at the time, just a status on the landscaping ordinance. But I think everybody probably did hear Melanie's question. So they are kind of related in a way. The simple question you asked Melanie about, is the steering committee going to get involved in the urban forest management plan? I think the short answer is no. That's not the steering committee design traditions project. That's housed up in public works. So as members of the public, certainly you can come and participate, and we would love that. But it's not a task for this group. But we did have a community meeting this week up at the Vista Lobos community room. It was pretty good at turnout. We had about 15 people, 20 people show up. The consultants were there explaining what they've been doing the last few months, doing the surveys, what they've seen. And the purpose of the meeting was similar to our first meeting, structurally, similar to our first meeting with the community, where there was tables, breakout groups, and they talked about and tried to get from the community what the community wants to see come out of that urban forest management plan. So it was a good workshop. I do wish we had had more people. It was, a lot of advertising about it, but there's a survey that's out right now, a community survey that can be filled out. So that's all going on right now, but I'm only peripherally involved in that, just kind of helping, with some advice and guidance, but really it's housed out of the forestry department, which fortunately the new forester starts on Monday. So they've got the new forester, Justin Ono, who's not new to the game. He's actually been in the area for quite some time. Yeah, Justin's officially, yeah. Yeah, he's been working with us on a contract basis over the last couple months, but he was successful in the recruitment and got the full-time job. So that's that. And then update on the landscape ordinance. To be totally honest, I haven't had a lot of time to focus on that lately. We've been really pushing to get the housing element out, because we can get it out for our 90-day review at the state. So that's consumed a lot of my time working with my staff, but that's on my short list. I'm working on getting examples from Davey Resources Group, who's the one doing our forest management plan, examples of landscaping plans that they've done other places, so we can vet that and see if possibly we want to work with them on that endeavor. And that's what I have, Madam Chair.
Does that answer your question, Melanie? Okay. Any other thoughts from the committee or questions for Brandon? Because Brandon, do you want to give a more general, or was that all you wanted?
Yeah, good.
But for item 4, any other updates?
Not really, other than what I said about the housing element. That's been consuming a lot of our time the last month. So that's been a big push of work. We're excited to talk about the buildable envelope thing with you today. I will say it's a short agenda today. Our next meeting, which we can talk about at the end of this, I will be coming back with what I think a work plan looks like to get us to that December date that we heard from the city council when we went. A pretty detailed work plan that details what needs to happen and who's going to be responsible for what in order to get us to that December date. So we can talk about that at the next one, but I'm working on that right now.
I did have a question, if that's appropriate to ask right now, in regard to the housing element. Maybe you could explain, because that might influence the design guidelines also. I didn't understand the mezzanine versus third floor thing. I mean, we have in the commercial district our 30-foot height limit that can easily accommodate 3 stories. And I think there is would be a good reason to allow for 3 stories throughout Carmel. Can you explain that difference?
So that was a good question. Right now, the plan is, and this is something we heard from the community at large, is that we don't want to blow up the 3-story, we want to keep it a 2-story look and feel in the downtown area. Like visually 2 stories, 30 feet is a height limit. Where people sometimes run into an issue with the mezzanines is that they can't get a mezzanine in because of floor area issues. So the question to the city council was, if we think mezzanines are a potential solution, you know, the example was used here in the room, like making a platform up here, basically more floor area, then would we allow people, if they're building housing, to get more floor area through a mezzanine? Not to build a 3rd story, not to go above the height limit, not to have a building that looks like a 3rd story building, but it's more about the interior of how that's being used. So that would be a potential incentive to people to get more floor area through a mezzanine inside of a structure.
But 3 stories are not allowed, even if it's within the
That's right. Currently, a building cannot read as a 3-story building from the street. And a mezzanine under the building code doesn't count as a story. It counts as a floor, which is a bit of a, but as long as there's a certain percentage that's open to the floor below, it's considered a mezzanine, not considered a story.
Can I follow up on that? That's a good topic. My understanding is, just to be super clear about the language, is that the mezzanines now are at the 3rd level of a building, obviously, when they exist, and yet the city requires that we make the buildings look as though they're 2 stories. So you conceal the existence of the mezzanine. That's how it reads now.
I don't believe so. I think you cannot have a 3rd story.
No, I'm talking about a mezzanine. I'm talking about mezzanine now.
Yeah.
So we have mezzanines in town now. We have a mezzanine proposal for the pit, for example, that has never had an issue before any person in the public or the staff for the fact that it has mezzanines. The mezzanines are concealed in the appearance of a 2-story building because the 30-foot height limit is allowed. So the question I think you might be asking, Marian, is what's the difference between having a mezzanine that's concealed in a 2-story appearing building and having a 3rd story that's concealed in the appearance of a 2-story building? And I'm going to venture an answer, even though this is your question to answer. I think that the staff, this is my guess, as observing this for the last several months, is attempting to get this housing thing done without making other changes to the code or minimal changes to the code. If we can get the housing thing figured out without disrupting other elements of our regulations, then maybe it's something that could be handled differently. Obviously, in my mind, as an architect, if you go up a stair and there's a door at the end at the top of the stair, that is not any different in any kind of anybody's experience than there is not a door, and instead there is a balcony or something over the stairwell. So it is in my mind, a trivial difference, but one that maybe the staff doesn't, this is my conjecture now, does not want to tackle while we're trying to get this housing thing done. But that is just my guess. Maybe you could tell me if I'm onto anything.
There may be some truth to that, but that's not entirely it. So the code just doesn't allow a 3rd story. So if we were to make a full 3rd story inside of a building, meaning there's a floor across the entirety of a building structure, that's a whole new story, because then each story has to have windows and all that stuff. So it would read like a 3rd story building. I don't know how, you maybe could pull it off. It would be very difficult to hide a true 3rd story inside of closed space versus a mezzanine, which is part of the 2nd story. It's a loft, basically, yeah. And so, again, the thing that the question that was put to council is not about, do we want to start allowing 3rd stories in the downtown area? I think that has been settled over and over again through those housing conversations. Nobody wants to touch that right now. The question was, will we allow people to use a mezzanine as a mechanism to create more floor area and not hold them to the standard of the floor area limitations? Because that's where people are running into it, is they'll go over the floor area limitations in a 2-story commercial building if they put in a mezzanine, because mezzanines count as additional floor area. They don't count as a story.
Don has a thought.
Well, I have a question, maybe I'm misunderstanding. If this is in the context of solving the housing mandate, how does mezzanine work? Because it has to be open, doesn't it? How can you have a separate unit that's open to the other one?
it just creates more livable space. So you have, think about an interior volume. If you can cut it up this way and have mezzanines above, you're going to have more livable space. So it's more likely that somebody can actually live there. They maybe can have an extra bedroom, so they, instead of just a single person living there, it's a couple and a child, or two individuals. It just provides you more space inside of.
They count as a separate housing unit?
If they're divided up that way, yeah. Yeah.
I think what was maybe confusing in the presentation was that Marnie actually showed 3-story buildings and said, we have 3-story buildings in town. Obviously, you have settled that for this round, but as there came a letter in from Stephen Engblom that I thought was a very good letter, that also encouraged everybody to think about having more 3-story buildings in town. So it's obviously not here the right place to do that, but I think it would be good to look at that even in this context. So
I'm glad we're having this discussion. Just my 2 cents is that I completely agree with what Marianne is saying. In my opinion, the entire code does not need to be touched. We can still have the 30-foot height limit, the appearance of 2 stories. You would now need to, for your mezzanines and lofts that you have now, you have to have proper ventilation now.
I'm not saying lofts. I said a proper 3rd story.
You're saying total.
I know, you might not be understanding what I'm saying. I'm saying what we have now is the appearance of the appearance of 2 stories with full inhabitation requirements for lofts and mezzanines. We do not permit a 3rd story now, but the
That's okay.
appearance
No,
to the outside would not be any different if those floor plates went across and closed with a door that's interior to the loft. So I'm supporting what you're saying, Marianne. I don't know if you realize that.
A little bit far from the
I know.
update.
But yes, you are. But we are. But I just think, no, I am.
Yeah.
You're right. But I just wanted to point out that Brandon says no, but I think that it is too messy for, my perception is that it's been too messy for the public, because I have made your point many times over the year. And it's too messy right now, I think, to venture a code change, even though it would have 0 effect on the appearance of these buildings. So I would encourage us to take it up after the housing thing has been resolved, although I think it would have been a good opportunity to do it beforehand, too. So, all right, that's housing, unless anyone else has any other housing-related questions for Brandon or anything. Okay, Nori, sorry to keep you waiting over there. Are you with us? Can you hear us? I don't know if we can hear you. Uh-oh.
Hello, yeah, yes. Hello.
There he is. Welcome. We're looking forward to hearing more about buildable envelope.
Okay.
So
Brandon,
Nori, let me tee this off for
running
you.
the
while
show there, and
Yeah, Nori, go ahead and start sharing your screen. Let me go ahead and start teeing this up for you, though.
oh, you want to share my screen?
Yeah, you please go ahead and share your screen. That way you can walk.
Rather than you're not going to run it there.
Yeah, you
Okay.
go ahead. That way you can walk through it. So while Nori's pulling that up, we're coming back to the steering committee with a more refined version of the bulk plane or encroachment plane, buildable envelope, whatever we want to call it. A little more refined version to share with you. The hope is today, if you could please give us feedback on what you're seeing, something you think might need to be modified, and we're going to take this and just move ahead with it into incorporating it into the zoning code updates that will come back eventually as part of a bigger package. But we'd like to have this be give us your comments. If you see something that's missing, we will try to incorporate those. And then when we come back with a more complete package, if we missed something, you have further comments, we can take them then. But ideally, we'd be getting your comments today on this. So Nori, with that, take it away.
Okay, so are you seeing
Don't
my
take it away
screen?
just quite yet, but I just wanted to ask if you could let me know, Brandon, or let the group know, this big X on page 15 that's going to be deleted. Obviously, we're going to cover that, but I think many of us had said over the year that we're actually including, I'm just going to say for myself, we're not really sure what we're deleting because this has been a tough thing to understand for people. So if we just, I just throw that out there as something we might want to cover is how is this, you know, what is the cons of what we're deleting? But
Okay.
you just might want more detail when we get there.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, the tool that that we've been working with staff on is.
Hey, Nori, I'm so sorry to interrupt you again. Can you flip the view? It's coming through for us as like a really small screen. I don't know if you have like 2 screens up right now.
Oh, let's see. Let's see what happens here.
Yeah, I think you had us seeing the presenter view.
So,
Sure.
what are you seeing now?
Nothing yet. So that's good, but if you can go to like slideshow,
Let's see what
that's
we're
better,
doing.
yeah, and then go to full screen if you can, see what it does. There you go. Perfect.
Okay. The buildable envelope is a new way of addressing massing that helps to assure that massing is shaped in a way that would be compatible with the traditional context in the residential districts. The term is interchangeable with bulk plane, encroachment plane, daylight plane. There are a variety of other ideas or names that are used around the country, but the concept is essentially that there is this balloon, if you will, that defines where building can occur. It doesn't set limits on buildings themselves, but just their placement. And the simple definition is that it is a series of horizontal and vertical planes, and in some cases slanted ones, that define a 3-dimensional space that the building can occupy. Now, this does not set maximum building size. In fact, you do not want a situation in which the maximum allowable building size, which may be defined by floor area and height limits, can fill that space, because then you always get the same building form. The proposed building form has 3 components to it that reflect the traditional scale and character, and also work with some of the other existing zoning regulations that the city has. The front form is one that is 1 story in scale, and that is to maintain the traditional 1-story scale of buildings at the street frontage. Now, of course, the entire building can be 1 story, doesn't need to be 2-story, but at least that front portion must be. There is a rear form, which is defined by the current limitations in the code for a certain amount of distance from the rear property line that also has to be 1 story in scale. That leaves the middle form, where the bulk of the 2-story element can occur, and the length of that space is defined by, basically the 2 end units define the area that the 2-story volume can occur in, and we'll show you the recommended dimensions in just a minute. This was developed by looking at a variety of houses in town that had been commented on in workshops and surveys as being ones that were desirable or compatible or that fit with the design traditions of Carmel. And out of that, we sort of backed the dimensions that are recommended in terms of how a building massing might occur. That then led to determining that a 3-component form was the best tool to use in Carmel. with the lower elements both in the front and in the rear. We then tested the dimensions in a variety of scenarios, and the staff confirmed those dimensions with some existing buildings out on the street to be certain that this looked like it would work. And in most cases, those designs that had been identified as being compatible did fit, or could fit with a slight tweak in some of the massing that didn't appear to substantially alter the design concept or the design intent or the functionality of those particular houses. The buildable envelope works in conjunction with the other existing regulations. The buildable area limits are set by the floor area ratio, and then there's an absolute cap on square footage. And again, the idea is that the FAR, the building area that you can achieve through FAR, is less than what that envelope defines. And then the setbacks from the front and the rear and the sides would continue as they are today, including the composite setback. And that's something to point out here. The envelope is set at the minimum side yard setbacks on both sides of a property. But of course, you can't build a building all the way across to both minimum setbacks. You have to have you have to meet the composite setback requirements. But for purposes of shaping where you can build, the envelope is set at those minimum side yard setbacks. And then, of course, the maximum building height limits. And that's why you see you see the flat portion of an envelope here. Now, this one is not an illustration of the proposed envelope for Carmel, but for purposes of explaining it, you have a certain height limit on the sidewalls, and then the maximum height limit, which is defined by that central horizontal plane, and you connect a line at a defined angle, and that sets the area within which the building form can be placed. What the envelope does is it does define the building height limits within certain portions of the site. That is, while a maximum height is permitted, it isn't permitted everywhere. And that is how the envelope helps to define that. What it does by limiting height in certain areas is you can then shift the mass. And in this case, shifting the mass to the center of the site, away from abutting neighbors, and of course away from the street frontage as well with the one-story element. But that said, the envelope does not dictate a style or a form for a building. There's plenty of room within that to have a variety of design solutions. The recommended dimensions are these. This slide shows the recommended dimensions for that front form. And that is that the maximum height at that side yard setback, that vertical plane you see there, would be 12 feet. And there would then be a 45-degree angle, a 12 to 12 slope that pushes additional form inland. And then there's the maximum height of 18 feet. That is the flat central portion here. And so that is the recommended front form. Now, in evaluating properties in town, it appears that this three-step form can work everywhere. Now, there are some cases where the planning director would have to make some adjustments because of unusual site sizes. But it can work everywhere except along scenic, where a two-story tradition is a part of the design context there that's coming straight up to the street in some cases, and because of the circumstances of the way those lots are arranged. So imagine, if you will, that for that one exception area, you wouldn't see that front form. The middle form would just extend out to the minimum front yard setback. The middle form now rises to the maximum height of 24 feet in the middle, and the starting height at the side yard is 18 feet, and then you have the 12 and 12 slope. So that is the defined area for the middle form. And then the rear form, again, drops down and basically uses height limits and setback requirements that are already identified in the code, and this just simply models what the effect of that would be and adds the sloping in from the sides to it. So that's the overall recommended form that would be applied. Now, there are exceptions, and those that appear to be appropriate to allow to push beyond that envelope, that is to encroach, would be dormers. Now, there would need to be some limits defined on that, and that is often done in terms of how much of a roof can be dormer and the number of them that can occur along a side so that it isn't abused. But then certain solar panels, chimneys, some eave projections within a certain limit on those, and some other rooftop features. And then there are a series of other encroachments that are already listed in the code. And the idea is that all of those that are permitted now would be permitted with the envelope. Now, there is the other condition that you're all aware of, and that is that the city may at times permit a one-story garage to encroach into the front setback. And there are certain criteria and conditions for which that would happen. And those criteria would still continue to apply for anything that projects beyond this envelope. So, but again, that is a special condition that is provided through a permitting process and is not an automatic right. So I've already mentioned that the envelope would generally apply throughout the R1 district in a 3-step form, and then along scenic in a 2-step form. Now, I did touch on the fact that there are some lots, and particularly along some of the eastern and southeastern parts of the city, where there's more topography and there's some irregularly shaped lots. They're flag lots or fan-shaped, et cetera, where there would have to be some adjustment in the way in which the envelope is applied. There might be a portion of the site, for example, where it would be too thin, too narrow a piece of land to apply the envelope, or there would need to be some adjustment made. Another condition to consider is that of historic properties, where an addition, it may be that it would be more appropriate for an addition in terms of being compatible with the historic character of the building, that it would actually encroach or stick out beyond the envelope. And so that also would be an area of flexibility for dealing with historic structures. Then finally, it wouldn't apply to downtown, and that includes the commercial and multifamily and mixed-use areas in the downtown, because that, of course, is not a part of the design traditions there. Having party walls that are right along a side property line and having masses rise vertically to the maximum building height is a part of the character of the area. And in conjunction with guidelines that address varied massing and maintaining elements of lower scale along the street frontage, the envelope wouldn't apply. It wouldn't be useful, and in fact, it would create problems. Now, in terms of how would you know if something is compatible? Well, there's so many computer programs now that designers can use to illustrate how their particular project fits within the buildable envelope. And so that would be a part of the submittal requirement, that the applicant provide that documentation. Now, in some cases, that can be as simple as elevation drawings, front and side yard elevation drawings, or cross sections through a property. But in many cases, particularly those for more complicated or larger projects requiring a three-dimensional image such as the one generated here, would be a part of the application requirement. And then staff would then use that documentation to confirm that the project complies with the buildable envelope limits. Now, how would the buildable envelope relate to some of the other regulations? Because there are things that are, there are bits of yarn that are woven throughout the code that you have to be aware of. Certainly, the basic building standards of setbacks would remain in place. As I've noted, those remain the same. There is the provision for volumetric measure, though, that would no longer be needed. And that's one of the things that's difficult to calculate. And in fact, there have been some unusual interpretations of the way the volumetrics are written in the code right now. And so the idea is that that regulation could go away because the buildable envelope accomplishes the same objective, and perhaps in a more effective and in a clearer, simpler way than the way the volumetric measure has done in the past. And so in some cases, a portion of a table, such as the part here of table 1710F, those references to maximum exterior volume would go away. Related is a smaller, simpler height limit concept, and that is for landscape structures that might be located in the front setback, and primarily focusing on the idea of fences, that there would be a height limit at the front property line that is lower and can rise up to a maximum height limit at the minimum front setback line. And any structure in between would follow the sloping line between those two height limits. And so in this case, the height limits would be 4 feet at the front property line and 6 feet at the minimum setback line. And therefore, any wall or structure in between would be adjusted along that line. So that's not necessarily a volumetric buildable envelope regulation, but it's a related tool to use in conjunction with the buildable envelope. So that's an overview of where we are in working with staff in developing the buildable envelope and in actually coming up with some specific dimensions for it. So I'll turn it back over to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Nori. I think I'm just going to hand it right back over to the chair because we're hoping to hear from the steering committee on this and then probably go out to the public.
Okay. Do you want me to leave this up or exit the show?
I don't know if people might want you to flip back around, Nori, if it's okay to leave it conveniently there. Yeah?
Okay.
We have questions. I imagine we have questions because it's a big change. So anybody from the planning commission? What the heck?
You're having flashbacks.
I'm having flashbacks. And
Roberta's having flashbacks.
that's right. Jet lag and flashbacks. Sorry. Anyone from the from the committee would like to ask any questions of Nori to start us off?
It's very self-explanatory.
Self-explanatory, says Mary Ann. Dawn, is it self-explanatory to you? Do you have any questions?
Well, I had a question before that wasn't answered. If Nori could enlighten us on the experience with those cities that have adopted this?
Good question.
Well, it's been used for, I don't know, about 20 or 30 years around the country that I'm aware of. And I think they find it an effective tool. It's, they at times adjust the numbers after, you learn that maybe one number wasn't the right number or something like that. But as a tool, I think they find it relatively easy for people to understand and visualize, and easy for staff to administer.
Does that answer your question, Don? Melanie? Questions?
I just think it would save a lot of time and effort. Volumetrics has been a pain in the neck ever since it was implemented. I don't think anyone really likes it. And it's easy for the public to understand too. So I think it's a very good thing. Thank you, Nori, very much.
Public, are you completely understanding all this?
Hi, this is Stephen. Is it
Sorry, Steve, can we
okay to talk?
can we get right back to you in a second? I can't see the screen.
Go ahead.
I like this a lot. Number one, I don't need to hire a volumetrics expert. Most of us in 3D CAD can do this quite quickly. And we're getting an extra element here, which is the higher the building goes up, the more we're pushing it back to the center. So that gives more of a clear space between projects, residences. So I like that as well. Also, the front form, I was trying to figure out if the plane on the front form shouldn't be angular from the building out towards the street instead of a square top, but I answered that myself. This is the correct way to do it, in my opinion. And I think that's it. I like it.
Being a public person, not an architect, I just want to make sure, I know in the past that the volumetrics posed a problem with, for instance, high-peaked roofs that we've had in the past that we've not been able to have. And so I'm assuming that this will take care of that problem. And the second question is something like a salt box design that's 2 stories right at the front. Is that still okay? So those are my questions.
I can take those, and I think then we have, this is Brandon, then I think we have somebody online. So to your first question, the volumetrics doesn't actually preclude people from building high-pitched roofs, but what it does is it essentially penalizes them for building high-pitched roofs because you're giving up volume to a space that's not livable, and so because people want to try to max out the volume of livable space because that increases the value of a house, we don't really see those being built. Then your second question, the way this is set up, the front form, you wouldn't be able to build 2 stories in the front section of this form, so you wouldn't be seeing these 2 stories straight up at the front property line anymore.
But you could a few feet back.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not disallowed. It's just not allowed right at the property line.
Right. And in many cases, that lower form is taken up with a porch. That's 1 story, and the house itself is 2 stories behind it.
Mm-hmm. Neil has his hand up, but do you mind, Neil, if I can get somebody who was trying to speak online? I don't know.
Hi, this is Stephen. Thanks for the presentation, Nori. I guess while you were presenting, I was looking back at the other traditions, residential traditions, guideline work that's being done. And I guess like as a point of process, I was trying to understand where in that document this connects back to, because I guess we'd want to make sure there's no conflicts or that they're informing each other. Is that correct? That seems maybe obvious to everybody. I'm just making sure that these are meant to inform each other. Is that correct?
I think that is correct. Yeah. And
okay.
I think there are logical places, personally, I think there are logical places to put it where you are already talking about the massing of the buildings and where the volumetrics, go ahead, Brandon.
If you don't mind. Yeah, Stephen, it's a great question. I agree with Victoria that it's very consistent with what we've been doing. And I think that this is a regulation that would live in total in the zoning code. But because now we're looking at figures versus math, there are places to put these figures into the guidelines that then will direct you over to the zoning code for how to actually implement it. So I think it dovetails really nicely with what we've been doing. But it's a great question. Thank you for asking it.
Yeah, because I think like and I heard Nori, I heard you as you presented it, it was like you're bringing us along step by step, but then you would give us caveats like this isn't meant to be a suggested volume, right? It's just it's an allowable envelope in which a volume can sit.
That's
and
right.
Because when I look at this, it feels like one of the principles that I really like that the group agreed on these design traditions is that we're trying to encourage variety and not sameness on the blocks. And I just worry, like as an architect, then I look at this and I think like the principle of like pushing things to the middle seems to encourage a lot of like bulk volume in the middle, which at the end of the day is it feels like it's encouraging sort of a monolith in the middle of the building lot, as opposed to encouraging things like creating, sort of outdoor rooms or things like this. Like, I don't know. I guess it's a tool within the larger design tradition. So it's not saying that it has to be that way, but that's my fear is that, even if it wasn't intended, that somehow this might result in people thinking, owners with their architects thinking like, oh, it'll be easier if I just do it this way and I push the mass into the middle. And then we end up with a lot of sameness, which isn't the goal.
Two things. One, of course, the guidelines have a lot of concepts in them about varying massing and not being repetitive. A slide I guess I didn't have in here, and I'm not sure if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, but the maximum allowed square footage is about 1/3 of this envelope. You can never get close to just maxing out this envelope and having the same form down the street.
Well, maybe just a suggestion, and it feels like it would be fairly easy to do. It might be interesting, like the opening page of something like this would be like, just run like a grid of 9 different options. Like you just show people like the different volumetric options and making that point so that, you're really encouraging people to not create the same thing that's right next door to them. Because I heard that over and over again while we were having that design traditions, that people are worried about uniform house shapes or uniform, layouts.
Right.
So anyway, those are my comments. I think,
that would be easy.
Those are great comments, Stephen. And just so everybody at home knows, we can only see the presentation right now, or I should say I and Brandon can't. So we don't know if people have their hand up at this moment. I know there are not a ton of people out there, but Stephen, thank you for just piping up. If anyone else wants to just pipe up, you can feel free to do that at any time and let me know.
Do you want me to stop sharing so you can see?
Can you do it so that it shows both, Nori?
I don't know.
I don't
I'll
think
see
we
what
can.
happens.
That's the problem. Yeah, we can't. So is there, well, let me ask this. Is there anyone else? It might just be you, Cindy. I don't know who. Oh, no, I can't see who's there. But anyway, you're going to try to bring it up separately?
Yeah, there's no hands up.
No hands up.
Really,
Okay.
it's just Stephen, Lucinda, Catherine Walker Davis.
Okay.
There's only 3 people.
Okay. So if anyone else wants to pipe up at any time, please feel free to interject. Neil has his hand up. I have a number of topics I want to bring up that hope. Okay. Are you sure? Okay. Well, first of all, just following up on what Stephen said, I agree that there's just something about seeing a diagram that makes you get a certain inspiration that we know you don't want to have. Even the comment, Nora, you just made about, or no, maybe you made it, Brendan. Somebody just said that 1/3, you could never fill more than 1/3. I mean, that is a very important thing to understand. Maybe that comes right with the first slide of the envelope. I had a question about the heights. I'm assuming that the heights are just coming from the code. So they seem very tall to me, that you can do 18 feet at the front. But that doesn't matter. If it's from the code, that's the code. That's where we have. So, you know,
I
true.
think it's shocking because you're seeing that
Exactly.
extrapolated in a full
Right.
form.
It is shocking.
Yeah.
That's right. Which again goes to Stephen's point to back off of the shock of seeing the envelope. I wondered to question to Nori whether, and maybe this is way too complicated, but whether there's an inflection or any thought that the group has given, the folks working on this, to the solar issues, to the north-south issues. We do have a community that was laid out in a north-south direction, possibly on purpose, I assume. And I don't know, this is a symmetrical envelope. I don't know if that, the solar issue indicates it should be a symmetrical envelope. I throw that out there. I know that, I don't know if it was considered. Go ahead.
To that one. So Nora, let me take a swing at that one because it is very true what Victoria is saying, and it's so important that in fact there are other sections of the zoning code that already speak to that. So just like some of the other things that Nora mentioned about composite setbacks, all of the other regulations for development would still exist with the building envelope. So if you decided to move your mass all in the center area all the way over and took away someone's total solar access, we wouldn't be able to approve that project. It would have to shift to the other side within the envelope, or some of it would have to move away to give them some of their solar access back. So all those other tests, those development tests still exist with the implementation of a building envelope.
Okay, this is stimulating thought.
Yeah, when it comes to solar, to that solar envelope, with this diagram, of course, by shifting the mass in the middle and not letting people go in the front or in the back, we always will shade right the next door neighbor's south side. I noticed that new project right across in the back side of the Sunset Center, a really little low house with a whole bunch of solar panels on the south side and an empty lot next door. That new guy next door is super restricted because they basically can also not only build a house that's way too low for the site because the other guy does his solar panels on it. So I think that it becomes an issue with this center high envelope.
I would assume that some of that gets taken care of by a third. You're only filling a third, and again, maybe there's some items here that we need to be vigilant about that comes immediately with the first introduction of this illustration. Folks, look at this new thing we're doing, building envelope, this is maximum, all things that Nori's already said, but that might require notes or sketches to make it clear. It's never more than a third. There are solar issues on every lot. Don't be deceived by the symmetrical nature, that kind of thing. Are we showing the actual setbacks here? Because the rear lot looks the same as the side, and I know that normally it's not. So is this the actual diagram, or it is? Okay, so why does it look to me that the rear setback is the same as the side back? Is that like an optical illusion? Is it? Okay, because I was just looking at this chart.
The difference in the rear.
Okay, go ahead.
So the difference in the rear setback is the height that you see being cut down in the rear, that's in the code already. So that height limitation, that's where there's an additional, if you want to call it a setback in the rear, it's a height setback essentially. But that exists right now.
Okay. All right. Everything's to code then. I wondered, again, this is a sort of follow-up on, again, something Stephen said about his multiple examples. Maybe this will take care of it, but I wondered if we'll just see what sketches come, but if there's, once you have this maxed out and showing every possible place you can be, Nori already made the point that these setbacks are never simultaneously at both sides of the lot. I don't know if there's a way to make that clear in the sketch.
Actually, when you do the math, it's really clear. I just subtracted all this, and you have 56 feet to play with in length of going back and forth. So that should be enough for a single-family house.
Side to side?
I'm curious. There's one exhibit here which almost shows extreme limit. Now, is that, could Nora just comment on why does that thing look so small? Certainly that isn't filling.
That's the one, he made a specific comment, that's the one that's not art. So the question was, if you couldn't hear, Don asked was, there's one slide that shows, it's more of a darker blue envelope actually, and it's got a little, tiny little postage stamp of a house inside of it. That was the one that Nori said is not our actual envelope, so don't worry about that one. That's not a real example. But we need to create examples with our buildable sizes in there.
No. Well,
Yeah,
but
this wouldn't be in the
I
regulations.
don't know if this is up on the screen now. This is from the earlier presentation I did to the committee back several months ago. This is a model of the current building envelope, if you will. It's de facto by the current height limits and everything, and the maximum house size in a very simple building form. So while this is not the stepped or set back form that we're talking about, generally speaking, that amount of volume is permitted with some of the stepping down. And you can see, relatively speaking, that there's a lot of room to move around and do. And that's all if you were to build everything all as a two-story building. So there's a lot of room for variety within that envelope.
Nori, I noticed that this was done with a lot that slopes upward from the street. I trust that it performs equally well with a lot that slopes downward from the street. And
yeah,
then,
both have been modeled. You can see that here. This is the downhill version and the uphill version. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And how do we establish the angle of slope for the envelope on the property? Some properties slope front to back as well as left to right. What gives us the baseline slope for the envelope?
Well, I mean, that's a case-by-case determination of exactly how this form applies to I don't know what the term is for a topography that is going in both directions, as you say. But the idea is that they follow the slopes. So this would get worked some if you have topo going in both directions.
Actually, in Carmel, the height limit is measured from the actual ground, not average natural grade. So automatically, your plate height is always set from the ground. So basically, this whole thing will tilt just by the current regulations.
Right.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Nori, what were some of the other cities that have adopted this?
Los Angeles is one that we worked with to develop it. We have, I'd have to, we have a research paper where we summarized several other cities. Denver uses it, and I don't know. There are many. I'm just drawing a blank right now
If
in
you
terms
could
of specific.
provide us a list of some of those more in our size than Los Angeles. If we were to call them, what would their staff say or citizenry about the unintended consequences of using this?
I think for some it's been where there's the stepping down requirement in the rear that it they weren't able to do a two-story addition to a one-story bungalow in front that was in front to make something work effectively. But that's because you're balancing different objectives between maintaining a scale at the street and respecting neighbors behind you. So the comments I can think of normally have to do with the shape or the dimensions of the envelope, not the tool itself, but the details of how they're tailored. I think one of I know that we had to work with in LA was there were so many different contexts and having to come up with a variety of ways rather than a one-size-fits-all situation. It seems, though, I mean, in Carmel, because so many lots are relatively similar, although there are certainly a lot of exceptions, that you can use, with just a couple of adjustments, a couple of forms pretty effectively.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I've got just two quick questions. One question is, you talked about looking at houses, existing houses that people liked, and they were allowable within the envelope, which is great. But I'd be really curious to understand what homes and buildings do we have that would not be allowed? It'd be good maybe to even have a document where we could see a survey of homes in the community and which ones fit and which ones do not fit, so that we know, so you've proven that it seems to do no harm to certain buildings. What is it stopping us from doing? What is it preventing? Just so we understand what its impact would be using examples that we would understand within the community. So
well, certainly one of the things we were looking at was a 2-story flat roof form right up front. And that would be difficult to achieve with this envelope.
It would be good to see it, though, with other examples, and especially with real-world examples from our community. What would be blocked using this? What houses would not have been able to have been built? The other question is, so on scenic, you were talking about sort of a blanket. Scenic doesn't count. Are there no lots on scenic that would fit within this envelope today? Is it really the truth that none of the lots on scenic would fit within this envelope? None of the buildings on scenic?
Oh, well, there are several that are 1-story where it would work, certainly. But there also are several that are a 2-story right at the minimum setback line.
So would we maybe not consider grandfathering in the ones that are non-compliant and applying the envelope to all the other buildings? I don't see why we would necessarily need.
I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a good question. It's a policy decision. It's something that the steering committee would make a recommendation on, ultimately through the adoption process. I think the concept here is that if you look at scenic as a whole, it has a different sort of like design ethos than some of these other lots within the city, where that is a more common type of design to see, where it's all pushed towards the front with the 2 stories right at the front.
But that's why I'm asking what really is. That's why I'm asking what really is the mix, because if the mix is 1 out of 10 doesn't fit and the other 9 do, then maybe we should use the envelope and just give some people exceptions for when those houses change hands or need to be rebuilt. But I would want to understand what that statistical mix is before just saying, hey, we're just going to pass to everything on scenic.
As a follow-up to David's question, maybe the question is, would it be desirable to not have all houses on scenic fit the new envelope? Would it be desirable to have on scenic all homes that are 2 stories right up to the street? Because with the property values down there, that is essentially what I think we will get in the long run, if that's the case.
Since Brandon mentioned that this was something that we might have an opinion about and advise the rest of the bodies on that, we could take a moment and discuss that, what we think we 5 might suggest to the Planning Commission and the Council for that. I tilt toward what David is saying. I feel as though when I walk on Ocean, I see a variety, although I certainly acknowledge what Nori's saying, that there are exceptions that are more likely to appear on Ocean than elsewhere. But I would, right now, unless someone convinces me otherwise, I would go in the direction David's going, which is to say, why not try to preserve the variety of low buildings that are there now, and certainly grandfather what's already been built. But how do the rest of us feel here?
I want to listen to everybody else.
We'll listen to Don.
No, I haven't thought that through either quite yet. But have to worry about the unintended consequences of whatever we're doing and whatever road we make there.
I don't find an all two-story to the street on Scenic a desirable outcome, which I think that is what the outcome will be unless we give Scenic the same three-dimensional envelope.
It's not undesirable, is that what you're saying?
I don't find it desirable to have only two-story buildings right at the front on all along Scenic. I don't think that's a desirable situation.
And I'm not sure what grandfathering, or what would be grandfathered, that's my question.
Anything is already built,
Oh,
but nothing new.
okay.
Everyone would have to use the same envelope for everybody.
Including on Scenic? Okay, in any new application?
Right.
Okay, I didn't get that clear, I guess.
What do you think, Don?
Well, that makes sense.
Makes sense. Okay, let's hear from Doug. And then
I concur. It ought to be universal.
I agree with the room.
David agrees with himself and the rest of the room, but Melanie, you might be the outlier.
No, I agree.
All right, so we would recommend that in some formal way when we get to that point of recommending things. Another thing came up that I'll raise about, that Nori, this I think might be in the same page, about sometimes we might want to see 3D illustrations. And I don't know if, I think everyone saw that we got a letter about that in the last week or so. Why don't we see three? And people have been saying this for ages. And I know it's not necessarily exactly the scope of design, but it's coming in terms of what the submittal process is going to look like. I wanted to know how people felt about that. My inclination is, of course, there should be 3D submittals. It is not hard to do anymore if it was ever hard to do. So certainly if we're asking for a 3D evaluation of an envelope, we should be at least having a stick figure type of 3D submission.
You're talking digital 3D though.
Well,
The email you're talking about, I believe that the letter you're referring to actually was requesting for physical models to be built for every project.
okay. So I'm saying at least digital. That, I mean, we can talk about physical some other time, but we're asking for 3D evaluation of information. I think we should see 3D drawings at least.
Yeah, I agree.
I think I understand, but the grandfathering wouldn't say if you tear down a two-story house now, you could replace it. It would have to follow the current guidelines.
Be a non-conforming structure. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Go to Marianne.
I have seen a lot of fudging on 3D presentations, so they can be more misleading, I think, than an orthographic elevation. So if there are 3D presentations that are evaluated as part of a planning commission submittal, I think that they actually need to be placed inside the flagging that's up. Because if the flagging is checked of the right height and the 3D submission is photoshopped into this correct height, then you have a correct representation. 9 out of 10 3D drawings I see, even people that generated in my own office, they are incorrect, and people don't know it because they look so realistic. So they just can be really deceiving. So I'd be caution. Mm-hmm.
Can we add to what I'm saying, the idea that just because you're doing 3D does not mean that you are getting out of the orthographic projections that you have to that have to be consistent with that.
But when you have both, the 3D is what everybody is looking at. So I think that when you have a 3D submission, it should be truly placed within your staking, your physical staking, and there should still be some staking visible, and then you can scale it to that, and then you become you get a realistic 3D. Because the other ones, they're more dangerous than they serve the purpose.
So there's another trick, because Marianne's totally right. The 3D can be way off. What you can do is if you can get the 3D scaled to the same scale as an elevation drawing that has, and you put the 3D oriented completely flat, then you can put them over the top of each other and see if they line up. So if they're scaled the same in a 3D way, that'll give you at least a feeling of whether or not from the straight on view of the 3D, if it's the same. So there's a few tests you can do, because Marianne's totally right.
And then there's a difference between perspectival 3D. I don't know what exactly you're envisioning when you're saying, but and sort of orthographic 3D, obviously. So I'm just putting my vote in for not giving up information, but adding at least 3D drawings, especially when let me put it this way. I think it would be a time saver. We think of it as an extra ask, maybe, but given how much human hours go into all these things, both from the staff and the commissions, the volunteers, the public, and the designer, I think it would help actually make it go faster. Doug, did you have a comment on this? Can we have a little round of nods or something about whether we're okay with 3D, just in case this goes in the category of recommendations? 3D representations added, that are well monitored, accurate. Okay, so that's just another thing for you, Brandon. Yeah. And then maybe this is my last thing. I wanted to ask whether on the balloon that I'm told is the Acker balloon now, I understand that, could we add maybe in a dashed or different color or is that too confusing, the 3D representation of that one drawing at the end that's about the fencing and bushes and stuff? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that doesn't seem to me that needs to be in a line drawing, whereas the other one was envelope.
So the reason it's on its own sheet is because we just did that.
Okay.
So it would absolutely be part of this model. This was, I explained to Nori that this committee had come up with this sort of concept, and that's where this came from. This is a pass at physically representing what we all had come up with here. So yeah, it would just go into the drawing. Okay. Yeah.
And do folks have any thoughts? I just want to ask the committee here if this proposal on page 17 that's in line drawing form at the moment with the front property line and then the setback line at 4 and 6, does anyone feel like that makes sense? Doesn't make sense? Would change? Any thoughts on that at all? I just wanted to know. Yeah, go ahead. Sure, please.
Okay, so I'll explain why it's 4 and 6. We didn't just pick 6 out of the thin air. So as we know, on the front property line, you're allowed to build a 4-foot tall fence, period. If you get all the way back to the 15-foot setback line, then you can build the tallest fence you're allowed to build without going to the planning commission, which is 6 feet. So that was why we did that. Those are numbers that exist in the code right now.
I have a question at 15, when we are 15 foot back, isn't that where you can build a building? So isn't that higher than 6 feet?
For a fence though, now. So this is just for fences and structures.
Yeah, so I would vote that we can have the full height there. No, you can't have 18 feet. You can with this, you can only have 1 story. So whatever 8 feet that is. If you're that far back, and you want a courtyard there, you should be able to have the same benefit as if you build a house there. Makes no sense to me. Yeah.
Back to 5 feet 11 inches then. So then, because then this plane would catch.
Should be this height.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So that height so Marianne's pointing at the blue sort of the bulk plane full model. That is touching this line right now in the stick drawing, basically. So that is the same line. So what I'm saying is, I think what we mistakenly represented this should be 0 feet to 14 feet 11 inches. Yeah, and then the massing of the bulk plane would just take over from there. So this is not 15-foot line, this back line, this is 14 feet 11. So let's just, this is 14 feet 11 inches now back onto the property. Because you're right, the building envelope maximum height would take over at 15 feet.
Yeah, so we have a straight line from here to 4 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Well,
no, so at 14 feet 11 inches back, so still within that front 15 feet, the tallest thing you'd be able to build is 6 feet.
No, but I'm saying why?
Well, that's for you guys to decide. We started with 6, so you guys, if you wanted to go taller, that's a recommendation you guys can make, but that's where we're at, was 6 feet right now is the tallest fence you can build.
What I'm saying is if I choose not to have a building here, but if I choose to have a courtyard there that I want to enclose, then I should have the same benefit as the person who wants to build a building, which is 1 story high.
so this is what Brandon's saying. Let me try to explain. What he's saying is that if you pretend on this drawing that the full height of the building is at that 15-foot space and that this is not to scale and that little line just comes in an inch. If something is a fence, then you have to keep it regulation fence height until you hit that 15 thing, and then it jumps up. That's what he's saying. So you'd get your courtyard. You'd get your courtyard. But you wouldn't have a 14 or 17-foot fence right here in front of that setback. That's what he's trying to avoid. So you're right, Marianne. I mean, at the 15-foot line or the setback line, you have to be able to build something as tall as a house. But then in front of that, and this is a question to the group, this is why we're about to talk about it, are these the right heights? So in front of the building, giving Marianne the courtyard that's correct, right in front of the building, an inch in front of the building, is the height for a fence, is the proper height 6? And then the other, just to make sure we're getting everything at the same time, we also talked about opacity being, and this is not yet tackled here, and maybe it doesn't need to be tackled here, it's up to you, Brandon, maybe, but I don't know. We talked about being allowed to do possibly, in order to encourage landscaping, that if you're at the front property line, you do whatever height you do at a hedge, but then as you go back, you can get more opaque. It's a little harder to represent, but we need to probably have that conversation. So does everybody understand this courtyard wall thing now? No? No? Okay. The point Marion is just making is that we actually can't regulate anything that's on this setback line any differently than we already regulate it. So right now we regulate it at whatever it says, 18 feet or something.
No, 18 is for 2-story plate height and 9, I think, is 1-story plate height. I don't remember.
18 in the,
1-story plate height is not 2-story.
well, believe it or not, I think it's 18.
It's 1.
I know, but no, but in the center of the lot, it's 18 feet. Am I wrong?
Yeah, but that's not at that setback.
18 feet's the height of
The front form, Right.
top flat part.
right. So one could,
Height is not 18 feet.
right, but you could build a wall for a courtyard 18 feet tall on that front property line in the center of the lot. This is,
In the center, not
Yes.
the front property
no, on the front property
line.
line.
Not the setback line.
Yes, at the setback line, is my understanding. 18 feet maximum height of the front form. Is that right?
This is the setback, right? This is the
That's
setback.
15 foot back right
Yeah,
there.
it can't be 18 feet then.
It's 18 feet tall. Look at the date. Oh, you're not on the right page. Page 7.
So Marianne, the center part of that front, the center part of that front form, so the flat part in the front form is 18 feet, and then each of the two sides slopes down to what the plate height would be.
Also, we can't have this 18 feet plate height anymore in the center.
It's hard to read in this stuff.
Yeah, the numbers are hard to see, but I think there's actually,
I thought you said it went to 15 feet for the front form.
That's the rear form.
very narrow, so it wouldn't really be practical for a courtyard.
The courtyard in the middle of the front of the house. I don't,
Yeah,
it's like
but then, I mean, that would be kind of a waste of space.
I'm just saying that's the maximum you can build on the front property line. So right after you, we go back to this, the provisional sketch here of the line drawing. If you're coming up the front walk on page 17, and the front walk, you cross over the property line, the next wall can be 18 feet tall. If the front walk is in the center of the building, just so you know. I mean, that's how it is. I think it's shocking, but it's true. But anyway, that's, as David points out, it may be,
What numbers say here? I can't read them here.
you just have to look up at the,
18 and 12, Marianne.
yeah.
18 is the flat part, 12 foot is the plate height.
No, there are two numbers here, this and this.
So it's 6 feet is
Uh-huh.
the height, is the size of this upper,
This upper thing
like
is
polygon,
6 feet,
yeah.
okay, and the
The
below.
lower full square is 12 feet.
12.
So you add those together, that gets you your 18 feet.
Okay. And then there's one other number in the middle.
So it's a 45-degree angle from the corners in toward the middle, and then you have a fairly wide section that can be 18 feet wide, tall.
But it goes 24 to here.
Is your head hurting?
Yeah, it is. I mean,
And
really.
we've not moving.
I just want to copy later your measurements.
24 to the ridge.
I'm just taking them from up on the,
Yeah,
it would
yeah.
be nice if they were bigger. That's,
We'd have to do the math.
Yeah, but see, I can't see those on this. No, all I see is little, go blind.
yeah, I can see it. I'm just
And
taking.
then minus 12. So it's 20 feet.
There you go.
I'll get Brandon to give me a colored copy. It might be easier too.
Okay, so what we've done is we're addressing Marianne's good question, which is that you do get to build your building and anything like a building on the property, on your setback line. Whatever this building allows, you can do with a wall or a fence or a hedge at the setback line. You can follow the bubble. That was your original question. You didn't want to be deprived of that, and you're not. So now the question to the group is, fencing-wise, in the front yard, is 6 feet, 6 feet is the maximum allowable for a fence now per the code. So I'm guessing that nobody wants to raise that. I'm seeing shakings of heads, maybe.
I think in order to encourage people to move back from the front line, I would draw a straight line from the 12-foot line here to the fence.
So that's sort of, as I tried to do that example here. So if you drew that straight line back, and I'm sorry, David, from the top, this is the angle you would get out to your 4-foot fence. So that's the space. Or if you went from the 6-foot back to the house, this is the angle you would get. So it's all about just what the committee thinks is the right size of structures, fences, walls, whatever, in this front 15 feet. That's really what the
To
conversation
make
is.
sure I understand it though, does that imply that if that was the rule, if you had to stay within that envelope and the fence could be at a certain height, blah, 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 would that just give us a bunch of weird wedge-shaped fences as people attempt to max out against this rule? Because that certainly would not add to the character of the town if everyone just wanted to max out their privacy by having the maximum possible fence that fit in that envelope. Yeah, there was a comment earlier about you don't want, I think someone on the phone, and also on unintended consequences, you want this to constrain freedom of design. You don't want this form to effectively create the design for us. And I think that if we did something like that, we would actually have a situation where people would seek to max out the fence to match that shape. And that would be an unintended consequence that maybe wouldn't be great.
That's a really good point. I think we could just easily say whatever, because the front view of the fence will always be a flat fence. It's the sides that we'd be worried about. So they could just say, whatever the height of the front line is that you build, that's the height you have to return back to the building. So then you don't get a weird angular fence up into the house.
And the side fence, just a quick clarifying question, maximum side fence is 8 feet. Is that right?
6 feet.
It's still 6 feet.
15 feet, yeah.
What,
David's concern is that if you build like a 4-foot fence, or let's say a 4.5-foot fence right here, but you wanted to max out your privacy on the side, you would just follow that line back up. Yeah.
but let me ask you this, Brandon. When you put a fence on the property line, on the side or rear lot, isn't it permitted to go higher than 6 feet? Ever?
So you're allowed to have a 6-foot fence once it gets behind the 15-foot property line.
Never higher.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the city.
That's right.
So everything is grandfathered.
You can apply for the planning commission to approve a higher fence, but the sort of like by right fence is 6 feet.
So this raises another issue for you, Marianne. If you have something higher than 6 feet coming up to meet or come close to your front building, then it steps down 6 feet for the side. That's pretty weird too. Now again, we're talking about not the building wall, but things in front of the building wall. I think that'd be quite odd.
From the side also.
Um,
You can just have a rule that it has to have a level top. You know?
do you step it in all the way to the full setback of let's say 3 feet, for example,
Yeah.
on the sides?
So that it can be level.
Okay.
So this would be like,
Yeah.
whatever this front is right here, it returns back to the house on both sides at the same time.
Okay. Okay, I understand. All right, so for folks out there, I think what we're talking about really is allowing enclosures in the front yard that might be higher than 6 feet, but that have to they cannot go in the side setback. They have to remain inside the side setback and no farther than the building wall if we do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
If they come in from the sides also, they can also be higher.
I mean, I want to know how we are staying at 6 feet. I thought all of our discussion had been to move it down to 4 feet. We wanted transparency. We didn't want to have a walled-off city, and that's what we're getting with 6 feet. I mean, you know, it's,
4 feet at the front.
well, yeah, if we keep 4 feet at the front.
That's what they propose.
Okay, well, why do we keep saying 6 feet? Yeah.
The idea is to encourage people to not put a fence on the property line. That means if you have your fence further back, you give up 5 feet or 10 feet of your property for the public space, you are allowed to go higher. Because you are further back on your own property and you have planting that you can do outside, which I think is really nice for the cityscape to have more planting rather than having a 4-foot fence on every property line. That was the idea behind it.
So we haven't had that part of the discussion. So what we've had right now so far is a possible geometry discussion. Yeah. What Melanie is wisely bringing up is the whole point. You're saying the same thing, Marianne, is that she's talking about an incentive program to move fences back toward the buildings, but only if we say that at the front of the property line, this is now a transparent, vegetated. So then this raises the question, and I know it looks like you need to go, Marianne, but where does that zone of vegetation extend back to? At what point back? Is it a third, a third, a third? Because we're talking about 15. Well, if I choose to put my fence 4 feet in the front, an opaque fence or a semi-transparent, then Melanie has a good point, which is that now we've made the situation much worse. We have opaque or built fences and no landscaping at the front, and we're allowing higher fences back further than we have in the past. So your incentive program, I think, hinges on making sure that the property line does not have a fence, or that it's transparent, or that it goes to 0, for example. So, if you're allowed to go up to, but maybe it's a third. We do have a 15-foot setback. Maybe the first third is supposed to be vegetation, and then if you need, this sort of thing. This is not a discussion we've had yet, but we need to have it because, especially if you're going to persuade folks to go up to a higher, courtyard type thing here, that's fine as long as we get something in return. And right now we're not yet, just because we haven't had the chat.
I think you might find some resistance from people if you tell them they can't put a very open type of fence on their front property line. I think if they find out that the front 3 feet of their property or 5 feet of their property can't have any sort of fence at all, I think that's maybe a little, in my opinion at least, that's a little too far. But we can require, because the code or our language already talks about those being open fences, we can be more strict about that. If you're going to put a fence in that front 5 feet, it better be really open and include some landscaping. So that, from a staff perspective, implementation, that would be my recommendation, not to go to 0 to the front property line, but be more succinct about how you treat that front 5 feet of the thirds.
Okay, so you have to go. Marion has to go. So, we are at our 90 minutes, which everybody wanted to keep this to. We could. What do you recommend, Brandon? Do you recommend that this is a little tough. So, can we think about it? This particular issue, is there another way to handle it without a full meeting? Because this is just a very specific question. I feel like we've gotten through the whole document except for this thing that hadn't been really proposed yet.
We can just add it sort of like as a parking lot item to follow up on whatever our next meeting is when we get that agendized. I think that's fine, because it seemed like what I took away from this is everyone's very supportive of the overall concept of the buildable envelope. Sounds like it's a good solution. We need to put in some caveats sort of at the beginning of wherever it lives in the document intro, like, think about solar, think about the fact you're only going to get to use 1/3 of this envelope. So the bulk of this presentation today sounds like we're pretty clear on. It's just this last little bit, which is kind of a bolt-on that came out of this committee. So it makes sense we would want to talk about that a little bit more. So yeah, let's just plan on, I think, not continuing the meeting, just, today's done, and we'll add it to a future special meeting of the steering committee.
So then, I know we're a few minutes over. I don't want to keep Nori if he doesn't need.
He's already left.
Oh, is he? Well, I see his name.
He's still there.
Nori, do you have any thoughts? If we don't want to bind you.
And in fact, I do need to leave.
Okay.
So I'll work with Brandon on following up on some of the suggestions for the buildable envelope.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Nori, so much for this clarification of all this.
Very good, Nori.
So we'll let Nori go, and then just so that we can get to the quick, maybe just a couple minutes on the rest of the agenda items. Where am I getting my agenda? Okay, which are just to, the clerical items of future agenda, which we now have one thing to do, which is the opacity issue. That has got to be in there. We haven't had that chat yet. Any other thoughts about future agenda items? Item 6, I'm going to put.
I was gonna say, we've got a list of ones that we already know about, the municipal guidelines. We actually, I don't know if you remember or not, we need to finish up going through the last bit of the commercial design guidelines that we didn't get through. So there's a little bit of work left to do there. And then discussing the project timeline that I'm working on. So I think those are the most urgent ones.
Okay.
Melanie's got.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, that list that we had, that we were working on before, did we finish that up? I didn't seem to think that we've totally finished it. Could we just put it on there? Yeah. Because I just want to say that it's come to my attention in my walking that people are putting generators right up against people's fences, and I think we need to talk about generators, and you explain what the situation in the code is now, Brandon, and what the usage has been. I know everyone wants to buy a generator now, and on our tiny lots, most of our lots are tiny, that is a real imposition on the neighbors. Like this winter, very quickly, this winter in my walking, my God, I can't tell you.
Ruckus.
Oh, if the noise, the volume, it's the volume of them. Now, I understand that the ones that are on batteries are very, very quiet. But the other ones, it's like a freight train, because you'll have like 3 or 4 people in a neighborhood using those things, and it is really disconcerting. I mean, if you have one, then it doesn't bother you because you can't hear everybody else's.
Right.
But it's about everybody else in the neighborhood, you know, and so I'm concerned about that. And the other thing I'm concerned about is fire pits. On small properties, the smoke, the carrying on late at night, you know, like 12 o'clock out partying in your backyard, while if you've got, you know, 4 lots, it might not bother you so much. But if you've got, you know, if you've got somebody right next door to you, and we do have quite a number of those, I think we need to think about that, you know. So I just want to bring those 2 things up. If we could, you know, have some discussion, and Brandon, you give us, you know, your advice and comments would be really excellent.
Why don't we, Brandon and I, pledge to do a cross-check of the list, make sure that, I don't think those have not been addressed, because they weren't on the very original list, so we can, you did give me notes, and we can cross-check that with the list and make sure that we've gotten through the list that we had. If anything else has come up and that needs to go on the list for as a sort of catch the ends, we'll do that. So what I have right now is basically that. We're going to check the to-do list that we were doing that we thought we got through but may have some straggling things. We have this fence opacity issue that we've uncovered today, the municipal guidelines, and then did you have another one, Brandon?
We need to finish up the commercial. We didn't
Commercial,
get through that exercise.
Right.
And then the project timeline.
Right. Thank you. Okay, project timeline.
Give us a projected one that you think works.
Yeah, so Brandon is, as he said earlier in the meeting, is going to give us a projected timeline sort of presentation that he's been mulling over but hasn't completely pinned down yet. Any thoughts from out in the ether there? I see Cindy and Catherine Wallace still, but no comments today. Just hanging out. Okay, so then we're adjourned about 7 minutes after 97 minutes into the meeting.
Great work.
Thank you, everybody.